Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Real Talk on Racism. I'm your host, Russ Terry, and we're so grateful to everyone for all the support so far. Thank you, everybody who's watching. We have another excellent episode in store for you today. You ready? Okay, let's get to it. We are here today with my excellent friend, colleague, client, the amazing Lydia Payne-Johnson. Wait until you hear her story. She is the author of what may be my favorite title ever for a book. It's called The Black Woman's Clapback: How to Respond to Microaggressions in the Workplace. Lydia, thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Russ, for having me.
So great to see you. Okay,
Yes.
so first, how did you come up with such a freaking amazing title for your book?
Well, the title came out of actually the pandemic, mainly because Black women were starting to tell their stories in the workplace of things that may have been said to them, like, "Can I touch your hair? You don't sound like you come from New York, or you don't talk like a Black person." All these really questions that are all microaggressions, right? And so I put them together as sort of like, okay, how do you respond to them? Because first of all, a lot of us over the years, it's been shock, and then either you try not to answer, and when you don't answer, then all of a sudden you get this feedback about how you're unapproachable, or you're angry, or there's some weirdness or wonkiness that comes up in your performance reviews. So I said, you know what? Let's look at the top 10 of the things, the microaggressions that Black women tend to hear, and let's put them in a book and say, okay, here's how to respond in a respectful way that would make it very hard for someone to say, hey, why are you so angry?
Well, first of all, very sorry to hear that you and so many other Black women and people of color in general experience microaggressions in the workplace. Mm-hmm. Certainly here at the show, one of our missions, or part of our mission, is to educate people about microaggressions. Mm-hmm. What's an example of it, or what are examples mm-hmm. of it? And then, hopefully our viewers will reduce or eliminate that language or those actions upon seeing this. So I know for me, if something happens to me, I'm not a person of color, obviously, but sometimes in those situations, I feel like I'm so shocked, I don't know what to do mm-hmm. in the circumstance. And I do try to be more aware so that going forward, I am ready to respond in an empowered way. So first question, what's one example of one that happened to you? And wow. in the moment, how did you respond?
Wow. I think a really good example was during the Clarence Thomas hearings. I was working on Wall Street. I had a really nice office, and one of the brokers from the firm that I was working from stopped by my office and he was white, and he said, "What do you think of the hearings?" And I said, "Well, they're interesting." I was trying not to engage because I know that he's trying to take me down a path. And when he couldn't get me to really respond the way he wanted me to respond, he said, "You look like Anita Hill." And I said, "No, I don't." So I was shocked, and I do remember that I was gripping the arms of my chair so that I wouldn't just fly across and choke him. So instead, another colleague was walking by, and I stopped him. I said, "Henry, tell me, do I look like Anita Hill?" And Henry said, "No," and he kept walking. But that question, that baiting, is really what it was. It was just so infuriating at the time, and it's still infuriating today. Because how do you engage somebody by you were not getting the answer you wanted? So instead, you're going to try to say, well, you look like that person. So in other words, all Black people look alike.
Which is a phrase that is very dangerous, and I've
yes.
heard, and I try to tread very carefully. And one of the themes of our prior episodes is, attention white people, you don't have to say everything that you are thinking. And if we as a white individual think to ourselves, oh gosh, maybe this person looks like another person, there isn't necessarily a need to announce that to the individual. We can kind of say, note to self,
Yes.
okay, and move on without having to verbalize it.
Right, right.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like in the moment you were very present and handled it with grace, as I would expect you to do, but it can be difficult for some people to respond in the moment, or maybe they're more introverted or more shy, so they don't feel comfortable. So what's one of the 10 in the book, The Black Woman's Clapback, that you use as an example, and what's a possible response?
So one of the examples is, can I touch your hair? And that comes about either because the Black woman has natural hair, or she's her hair is braided, and for some reason there's some curiosity. And so in the clapback, the response is, no, you may not touch my hair. Why do you need to touch my hair?
Yes. Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
But that's an example of how to respond to kind of put the conversation on a little more of an equal ground, right? First of all, why are you so curious about touching my hair, right? Because I'm not going to ask you if I could touch your hair, Russ, okay?
Thank you. There's not much to touch, admittedly. Wow, well, and it's just crazy. And again, one of our prior guests, she said the same thing. She has beautiful, long, curly hair, and she experienced the same thing. And I can't believe that these people are out there
Oh, yeah.
asking to touch somebody else's hair. I think she even experienced somebody who didn't even ask, just touched, which
Yeah,
is
I've had that too.
shocking. Well, I'm not going to ask to touch your hair. It looks lovely, and I'm going to keep it moving. White people, keep it moving. Don't touch somebody's hair. All right, so one more question on these microaggressions that you mentioned in the book, The Black Woman's Clapback. So what advice do you have for Black women who experience these microaggressions but are afraid to do something or say something, either because of potential retaliation or it's not their personality, etc.?
I think that, first of all, it's important to take a step back. When you get that question, whether it's, gee, you drive a really nice car, how can you afford to drive a Lexus? Take a step back, because at the end of the day, it's not personal. Don't take it on personally. And I know it's hard in the moment to not take it personally. But I'm a big advocate about having advisors, or what I call a board of directors. And these are your sponsors, your mentors, or just people that you could talk to. Now, in the moment, you can't necessarily say, well, wait a minute, before I answer that question, let me call one of my sponsors. But I do think that it's important to just ask the question back at the person. Because I don't think they're expecting that. They're either expecting you to say yes, or to answer the question that they asked, like the thing about your car. And then really be, as you were saying, Russ, present. Check your emotions, because you're probably going to be angry, it's probably going to be shock, and it's going to go into anger. Okay? You don't want to respond angrily, because you'll feed into that stereotype. If you have to answer the question, let's say that it's your boss. If you have to answer the question, when the conversation is over, go to the ladies' room. go to your office, go someplace where you can be by yourself and take a breath. And then get your thoughts together. And if it's something that's really way out there, I would report it to HR. Okay. And I would recommend that you do that. If it's something that is more about a personal thing, like your hair, and can I touch your hair? Take a breath. Like I said, go to a ladies' room, take a walk around the campus if you need to, and then sleep on it. Sleep on it.
Good advice, so that the person responds as opposed to reacts.
Yes, yes.
A couple of the things you mentioned. So you said the stereotype. I think you were referencing, angry black woman stereotype. Yes. And you and I were at an event recently where a black woman executive at a major bank, JP Morgan, or I forget which one it was, said that she got feedback early in her career that she was angry.
Yes.
And that people thought she was angry. And I mean, we met her and she was the most lovely, pleasant woman ever. But it's like, there's this stereotype in the office that black women or in general, black women are angry, and it's like she got feedback that, you have to smile more to be successful here.
Yes.
Which, again, would a white person or a white man ever get feedback that you have to smile more? I don't think so.
No. And I think that's so important, because at the end of the day, all right, so you smile more, but what does that really have to do with your performance?
Right.
And those comments, or that feedback, as they call it, tends to show up in your performance review. And I think that what happens, particularly with black women, is like, we're so taken aback that you go into your head and say, okay, what can I do to fix it? You're trying to figure out, well, what did I look like at that meeting so that they think that I'm angry? So the burden, you take on that burden of trying to fix it, as opposed to pushing back on the person giving you that feedback and say, who's saying this?
Yeah.
And then also the notion of, how is this really impacting my performance? Did I do something during that meeting that would really keep me back from getting a promotion or getting assigned to, an important project, from getting a raise? Did I, so you have to try to bring that back around and tie it to, why are you sitting with this person in the first place? Well, if it's your performance review and this feedback, what does your hair or looking angry have to do with your performance? Am I doing the job? And that's the question that we don't ever really push back on.
So it's almost like there are these managers out there that call it feedback, but it's really something personal, something that's probably a microaggression, maybe even to some extent racist.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised, Russ, if it wasn't their own point of view, and that they are imputing it and saying that, this is feedback that I'm getting from, all these different people. But they're not naming. These are all faceless, nameless people. And, if you really think back, and I think back on my career where I've gotten that kind of feedback, it's sort of like, in hindsight, all of the people, the stakeholders that I had to deal with, or the partners I were dealing with, I wasn't having any issues with them. So where is this really coming from? And like I said, that's the question that we don't ask, is what's the origin, what's the source? And I believe myself, thinking back on my own career, that 9 times out of 10, it's the manager themselves, that they have a curiosity about you, or they didn't like the way you might have looked in sitting in a meeting, and they don't know how to really express it or articulate that except by the so-called feedback.
Yeah, this mysterious feedback,
yes.
Not saying who it's from.
Right.
And I experienced an incident like that at our old firm where we worked together many years ago, and there was an intern who was Nigerian, and we were introducing her to the group. We sent out a new hire note, and I had her write her bio in third person, and she said, is of the Igbo tribe, which is very common. If you're Nigerian, you say what tribe you're from. And I sent the note out, and then the head partner called me into his office that some other partner complained that somebody might be offended by that. So no one was actually offended by it, but I got called to the carpet because of something that this intern felt was important to introduce her. And hello, we're trying to be a more diverse firm. So it was very disappointing that I got in trouble for trying to be more inclusive, and there wasn't even evidence that somebody was actually offended, which if they were, tough darts, who cares? But it was that somebody could be offended, and they treated me like it was the crime of the century.
I can totally relate to that, totally relate to that. And I've had more than my share of those types of comments, feedback, if you would.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to hear that. Again, we're here with the incredible Lydia Payne-Johnson. If you want a copy of her amazing book, The Black Woman's Clapback, go to her website, lpjenterprises.com. That's lpjenterprises.com. She also has a podcast, What's on Your Mind? And the mission of the podcast is to help African American women who experience diversity and inclusion issues in the workplace. Great, much needed topic, as discussed earlier in the episode. So what have been some of the key insights shared by your guests on the show?
Well, for the most part, I do the podcast myself. There have been 2 episodes so far where I've actually had guests on. One recently, actually 2 sisters who they write books, and they're very supportive of each other. And the younger of the 2 sisters went through a lot of trauma when she was growing up, because she was, obese, she was darker skinned, she was abused sexually, and it was her older sister who her parents were pushing forward as the prettier one, as the smarter one, who was her protector. And so they bonded over the years. And so then she reached this point to where she's now accepting herself as she is. But it was through, having her sister. So having her sister be this support system for her. And so they actually reached out to me on Instagram and was sharing their story. And I said, that's really in line with what's on your mind, because what's on your mind, it's not just to talk about the diversity and inclusion issues. Those are very real, and I touch on those topics. But the primary focus of what's on your mind is to help Black women figure out how to get back in touch with who they are, to help them reach a place of self-acceptance, self-love, and to change this narrative around who they are. What's on your mind dares them to own their own power.
I love it. And I saw that you talk about reclaiming your self-worth, which is in line with what you just said. And I didn't think of it before, but I guess you're saying that people of color, especially Black women, can get beaten down in the workplace, in their personal lives, and there's a need to have them lift themselves up. Is that right?
Yes, to recenter themselves. So there was an article in the Washington Post earlier this year about Black women and the pandemic. And apparently Black women took a harder hit during the pandemic from a stress standpoint because they were the primary caregiver, they were, they had to work, they had, if they had children, they moved to virtual learning, that they had, maybe relatives who were not well had come to their house, so they were carrying a much heavier burden, and it was much more stressful for them. And we work, we keep our head down, and the clock keeps ticking, and we're moving along, and we don't really pick our heads up to look and see, well, where are you at? And so taking that time to take a step back, to breathe, and to recenter yourself, and also take this inventory and look at your accomplishments. But we get so distracted. And so reclaiming yourself and also what's on your mind is okay, ladies, there's all this stuff going on outside. How do we bring that in and bring it in so it focuses on yourself? How do you take that time and carve out, it could be 5 minutes, carve out that time for yourself?
Yeah, because this having a higher self-worth, I would imagine, is an element of self-care.
Yes.
And self-care is so important. And if Black women are caring for their kids and their job and maybe an aging parent and all of that, then the woman is potentially getting further and further down her own priority list.
And also in her demeanor, and some of that, in terms of looking at, there was an episode of What's on Your Mind about the woman in the mirror. And taking a look and seeing, how do you really look to other people? Taking a good look. Are you scowling? Do you see that, do you feel in your body that maybe there's tension in your shoulders, there's tension in your hands? What do you really look like? Because that's what other people are seeing. We can get angry and get on the soapbox and be angry about all the microaggressions we want. But how is this, your reaction or how you're feeling, your emotions about that, how is it manifesting on your body? And it's sort of like, well, okay, now what do you do to get rid of those frown lines? What do you do to come in, sort of like what the woman from JP Morgan Chase was saying, that she had this angry, her manager said she had an angry look. So she went back and she said, okay, the next day she came back and she walked around and shook everybody's hand in the boardroom and she smiled. And then she got assigned the big project. So I think that notion of we don't know how we've taken on and how a lot of the stressors, whether it's work, whether it's home, whether it's the environment, but most certainly, and the microaggressions, all of that combines to create some manifestation on you physically, mentally, and spiritually.
Well, good advice, and hopefully Black women or anybody watching today is inspired to, I think, as you said, look in the mirror. And the event that you and I were at, it's so interesting because all 4 of you there, all amazing Black women, all who've experienced microaggressions and maybe even outright racism, but all of you were able to speak about it in a calm way. Your overall demeanor was so happy, even speaking about something negative that had happened to you. So I give all of you so much credit for that.
Thank you. And what's also very interesting, if I can add on to that, is that as I've been doing the podcast, as I've been starting to get back out again with messaging, I'm amazed at the Black women who approach me and say, "You've told my story. That's me." Or, they've read the book, Reclaiming Yourself, A Black Woman's Guide to Navigating Work Life and Your Inner Spirit, that they said, oh my God, I saw myself on the pages. And those have been the reactions that I've gotten from both the podcast as well as the book.
Yeah, she has 2 books. I didn't mention the second one yet. So much to cover here on the show. All right, couple more questions for you. So you referenced that you were on Wall Street, I know in the 90s because I know you. So I cannot even imagine, but what was it like to be a Black woman, high-level Black woman executive on Wall Street in the 90s?
Wow, you talk about stressors. Wall Street in the 90s, in particular a lot of the investment firms, it was very high energy, very male dominated, very white male dominated. I can't think for one moment in the 26 years that I was at this one firm of a black man being hired in the, I was in marketing and advertising. We did a lot with the product areas, with legal, with just about every area of the firm. And I don't remember any black men, except maybe in the operations area. But in terms of having a peer or even another black woman, I will give credit where credit is due. I was very fortunate in that the executives at the firm that I was at were very supportive, very protective. They promoted me I got all the way up to senior vice president, and I was 2 steps below the CEO. So they were really very protective, but there's a culture there, and that culture was not very pleasant. And that culture took great pleasure in knocking black people, Hispanic people, women. I mean, the jokes, the kinds of things that a lot of those men did and other women, black and white, experienced was awful. So finding outlets to get away from it was even harder because it was it was so intense.
Well, I give you so much credit for navigating through that environment, and I'm so grateful to know you, and so grateful to have had you here on Real Talk on Racism today.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your amazing insights and for being the incredible person you are. Very inspiring, too.
Well, thank you, Russ, for having me. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate and so grateful for our friendship.
Likewise. Thank you, Lydia.
You're welcome.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for watching this episode of Real Talk on Racism. Always grateful to have you here, and we'll be back again next time. Have a great day.